And welcome on in to the latest edition of the Blue Horseshoe podcast. He is George Bremer. I am Ryan Hickey. Playoff week, George, is inching closer and closer to Saturday. We are now recording this on Thursday morning, almost there to the biggest playoff game, or the biggest home game at least, for the Colts since 2014. John McClain will make history right here on the Blue Horseshoe pod, being the latest guest to go behind enemy lines as last year. Rightfully so. We waved the white flag on that after the Colts just totally went in the toilet. So here we are making history on the pod. John, also at this point, George, friend of the pod with how many times he's been on now, will give us a tremendous perspective on the Texans going into this game. We'll give you our regular season finale pick for this game as well. So a loaded pod. But before we get to everything related to the game on Saturday, George, Wednesday night, we did have the Pro Bowl rosters released. And I think the Colts got fleeced, to be honest. They had one Pro Bowler, Quenton Nelson, four alternate Pro Bowlers in DeForest Buckner, Zaire Franklin, Ryan Kelly, and Michael Pittman Jr. But George, how the leading tackler in the NFL, in Zaire, did not make the Pro Bowl roster, I don't get it. I am truly mind blown. And the disrespect, the national disrespect to the Colts, George, continues again.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, hats off to Quenton Nelson. 6 straight Pro Bowls. I think he's just the 4th offensive lineman in history to start his career with 6 straight Pro Bowls. And in 15th since the NFL merger, player at any position. So just more affirmation that Quenton Nelson is a very special player that the Colts got there with the number 6 overall pick in 2018. But yeah, I mean, the Pro Bowl, I try to get fired up about it, but it's popularity contest. I think you see stuff like this every year as a result. You know, the teams, was it 2021, the Colts had 7 Pro Bowlers, and, you know, that didn't help them get to the playoffs. So maybe this time around with just one, they'll get angry. I do think all 4 alternates are worthy, you know, being in a big game. And honestly, the way things tend to go, probably the majority of them will end up going and being a part of that game. Because you just see, I mean, the Super Bowl guys are out obviously right away, which means Zaire's in good position, right? Because the Ravens, 2 inside linebackers, they may be looking for 2 linebackers in that group. But, you know, do I want to see Michael Pittman Jr. in a flag football game? That could be interesting. I mean, you talk about how competitive he is. You know, there could be some DBs getting lit up if Pitt's out there playing without pads. But yeah, you know, I think overall it's such, I look more at the All Pro, because I just feel like the Pro Bowl has just become almost a cartoon, the way that year in and year out, you sort of, players just sort of vote for who they know, who's on their team, who's in their division. Fans, of course, just vote for who they see on TV. You can't really blame them for that. And the Colts haven't been on, so you're not going to get, you know, nearly as much interest in them. You know, it's one of those things where, do all 4 of those guys deserve to be Pro Bowlers? Absolutely. You know, DeForest Buckner, the fact that he's only a 2-time Pro Bowler right there, I think tells you everything you need to know about the legitimacy of those rosters. But you know, at the end of the day, I think all of them would rather be in the playoffs next week than in the Pro Bowl anyway.
Or in the Super Bowl and have to opt out of the Pro Bowl and say, sorry, I can't go to, I think it's Camping World Stadium this year in Orlando. Sorry, I can't go. I'll be in Vegas. I'm sure
Nelson gonna have to step aside.
Yeah, if you ask Q, where would you rather be that week, in Florida or Vegas? I think he knows the answer. That is for sure. I mean, I'm not gonna watch it. Are you gonna watch the game?
No.
Okay. All right.
No.
But
I'm sure at some point there'll be a viral highlight of Pittman just absolutely like trucking a poor defensive back with no pads on.
He may end the flag football game itself. It may just be a skills competition next year. I think you're right about that. He's going to take no prisoners. So maybe that's why he's an alternate. All right, we can't put this guy in. Someone's gonna get hurt. A brawl is going to start because he's playing tackle while everyone else is playing flag football. But yes, all pro is important. And obviously, if any of those guys can get all pro, that's a huge and way more impressive accomplishment than just the Pro Bowl. But I'm definitely a sucker though for these voting processes, for these results. And it's just like you look at Zaire, I mean, again, I don't think he gets anywhere near the national recognition he should get in general,
Mhm.
partly because of his name, partly because it's on the Colts. And it's like that should not be the way it is. But with that said, how you get more national games, how you get more national notoriety, George, is playing well in those big moments. And this is going to be a game on Saturday night. Everyone's going to be watching. And so this could be, I mean, look, you have enough motivation. So I'm not going to sit here and try to tell you that he's going to be upset and motivated by the Pro Bowl snub. But with that said, again, you want to get the respect you deserve. And that comes with being a household name. How you be a household name, George, is by racking up 12 tackles against CJ Stroud, maybe taking him down once, and just being a total menace for that Houston offense on Saturday night. That'll get Zaire Franklin's name in a lot more people's heads than anything so far this season. Huge, I mean, obviously, huge opportunity, but this is a huge stage for the Colts, not just this year, but even now going next year, setting the stage of getting this team in people's minds of, oh, they're a playoff team. They're a good team. And they got their quarterback coming back next year. This could be this is a huge game, George, obviously to make the playoffs, but also to start becoming a household name again, like they were when Luck was quarterback in this team and when Peyton was quarterback in this team.
Yeah, I mean, you got to get in the playoffs and not just once, right? You got to be in there year in and year out. That's how everybody starts to know who's on your roster and everybody starts to take note of your team. This game's huge too because it's the only primetime game this year for the Colts, obviously. It's the third standalone game. The other one of them was at 9:30 in the morning. And the other one was what, a 4 o'clock game with the Panthers.
4:30.
So,
Well, 4:30 the
well,
Steelers and
the other
4 o'clock
standalone
with
was the Saturday. Yeah,
yeah.
the Saturday for so they've only played what, twice later than 1 o'clock before this. This will be just the third time that they've played later than 1 o'clock. They played 3 standalone games. There'd be a lot of eyes on there. And I think this is one of those times too where most of those eyes probably, if we're being honest, are there to see CJ Stroud. And so the Colts can really surprise a lot of people as they have all year long. Come out, play well, and have some people walk away saying, "Hey, you know what? I think about Indianapolis a little differently than I did before this game aired on Saturday night."
And ironically, too, we just talked about, being relevant for the first time since Luck and Peyton were quarterbacking them, obviously, respectively. Ironically, if people come away from this game impressed with the Colts and the Colts went on Saturday and let's say put up a good performance, hell, maybe even win a playoff game next year, now people are starting to respect them going into 2024. Ironically, when we talked about people knowing them as a household name with Peyton, it was because of Peyton. With Luck, it started with Luck. Ironically, this year's team would be everyone but the quarterback, leaving you impressed and having their play be the reason why you remember them. It's funny that just how different this could be because it's everyone else except the QB, where obviously the last 2 times people knew the Colts nationally, knew them well nationally, it started primarily with their quarterback.
And I think that's why Shane Steichen gets so much credit, because those are the two people who are going to be the most prominent in any franchise, the head coach and the quarterback. And when the quarterback's not getting those kind of national plaudits and the team's winning, look at the coach of the year standings. All of them are dealing with Dan Campbell's probably the only guy who's in the conversation who's got his starting quarterback and had him all year. Everybody else is dealing with the rotating cast there. But I will say this: this is total tangent. Somebody made an argument the other day that John Harbaugh should be the coach of the year, and it's hard. I mean, you see a case there. I still think if I had a vote, it'd be Stefanski, just because the Browns are going to start their 5th quarterback on Sunday. And they're obviously going to the playoffs, and really, if not for the Ravens, would have been hosting a game. I think they have the second best record in the AFC. It's just the team with the best record in the AFC is in their own division. So, or tied with Miami for the second best record in the AFC. That's a remarkable job. But who thought Baltimore was going to be the #1 seed back in August? When you're in training camp, I do think there's a case for John Harbaugh. I do think sometimes we overlook, the best team can't be the one with coach of the year. But, I think you could make that case for him. From a Colts standpoint, though, for Saturday, which is what matters here, this huge game against Houston, you talk about those alternate Pro Bowlers. Ryan Kelly is the one guy probably in that group that you wonder a little bit about right now. Hasn't practiced, foot's in a left boot. I do think he'll play. It's week 18, and I think anybody who can play will play. But you do wonder, is it something that could flare up during the game, or is it, bad enough? Because we say that all the time, like anyone who can get out there will not. Look, Julian Blackman can't get out there. His injury is too bad. It's possible that Ryan Kelly will be in that boat. We'll see, how that all shakes out. I think it's going to be similar to Kenny Moore last week, where it'll probably be a game time decision.
And two, depending on how he's moving and how he can play, like he can be out there, but if he's extremely limited, you don't want him out there. We've seen plenty of players gut it out, but actually then hurt the team because physically they just can't do what they normally can and are, again, more of a dead weight, if you will, than a positive for this team. So because this game is Saturday, right? Everything is moved up a day. So even though we're recording this on Thursday, in Colts world, it's really Friday. So later today, George, is the last day of practice. Let me ask you this from this perspective, because some players, we saw with T.Y. Hilton before, we've seen it with others. Does Ryan Kelly have to practice today in order to play on Saturday? He's not practiced so far Wednesday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Wednesday. I screwed the days up technically. Does he have to practice on Thursday in order to play on Saturday?
No, especially not this week. I think the veteran guys, you don't worry about that as much with them. They've been there, and obviously Ryan Kelly knows the system, and obviously he's been in the meetings, and he'll know the calls and things that he has to do if he has to get out there. I think again it probably comes down to what do you weighing that risk reward. It's sort of along the lines of what you're just talking about. Is it more important to get him out there and get a look at him physically so that you have a better feel of how he can move? Or is it more important to get him another day's rest? And really only the coaches and the doctors, have a good feel on that right now. So it'll be interesting to see. I think that the upside for all of this is that Wesley French has played well when he's been called upon. I think that's going to factor into this as well, that if they do have to go that direction, the Colts will have some faith and some confidence that Wesley French can get the job done as well.
It's good that right now we're talking about in week 18, at least one significant injury that is questionable. Like you look at the Texans right now, injury report, and we'll get an update from John here in a second when he joins us, but they have some big time names and big time contributors right now that could not play on Saturday and be key outs for the Texans team. So it's nice that at least in terms of the quantity for the Colts, it's only one guy we're talking about right now. But like you said, you look at this matchup, George, this does feel like one of the biggest keys is going to come down to both teams' offensive lines and who can protect well, because both defensive lines have been improving, have been playing better. And we obviously know the Texans, their lines are banged up. Hell, George, week 2, CJ Stroud was just a sitting duck back there as the Colts teed off for 6 sacks on him. It was, you get a sack. It was like Oprah giving away things during holiday time with the way defensive linemen were getting sacks down in H-Town back in week 2. So it's good for the Colts, at least, that it's really only one guy in Kelly, but it's still a super important injury here because, like you said, I think this game, we could talk about quarterback play. We could talk about secondary play. This game, to me, George, I would say if it comes down to one position, it's going to be offensive line.
There's a really good chance of that. You're going to have to keep your quarterback upright, and you're going to have to protect the football. We say that every week, but this feels like a game, not to spoil picks, coming up much later here. This feels like the kind of game where turnover could be the entire difference. One score that comes off a short field could be what sends one of these teams to the playoffs and the other one home for the season.
You're right. And also, too, we see in the playoffs, these small areas get magnified. Clock management, turnovers, third and short conversions, like a lot of small details, like you just said, are now magnified. We saw it last Saturday. Whether you report to the referee or not gets blown up now in these standalone, but also in these important stretch time games here where there's so much on the line with each win or loss. You're right. And the Texans have been very good in this area too. But that's one thing where you feel good going to this game from the Colts perspective is they have nailed, George, a lot of these small details. And for the most part, when they're losing, they're not losing because of, for the most part, mental mistakes, stupidity, and like their own doing. They're just getting outplayed. But like you said, a lot of those, really, it's a lot of the areas mentally. And that, I think you could put turnovers in that category as well in terms of mental errors. Like that's where the Colts this year have been really good and done a total 180 last year to this year in terms of not beating themselves with stupid errors and small lack of attention to detail, we'll say.
Yep, it's going to come down to, like you said, those little tiny details. Hopefully, it doesn't come down to a referee's decision either way, because I don't think anyone wants to see that. There's been enough controversy around the league. You don't want to see a playoff spot determined by that for either team. But I do think it's going to be right down the wire, and that's how it should be. The playoffs begin Saturday night in Indianapolis. I don't think there's any question about that. Everything about this game screams playoff game. Winner advances, loser goes home.
Two, if you're Gus Bradley, really fast, you're speaking of referees. Bill Vinovich and his crew is going to be officiating the game on Saturday night. They are of the infamous fame or infamy, I guess is probably the better way to say it, of the 2018 playoff game between the Saints and Rams with the infamous no pass interference call as the Saints receiver was basically leveled into the stands before the pass was there and no flag was thrown. If you're Gus Bradley, I think you're telling Juju, you're telling Jalen Jones, tackle the receivers. They're not throwing the flag. That should be the game plan. See Nico Collins as soon as the ball is snapped, tackle him. And this is a referee crew who swallows the whistle.
Get away with what you can, right? It's good defense if there's no flag that's thrown. It's going to be a physical game too. I think that's something that you can expect. I think both these defenses have shown that throughout the year. It's going to be a physical game. Colts are going to have to tackle better than they have the last couple of weeks. And I think it's going to be a really, really interesting matchup. But you know what? We got somebody coming on who knows the Texans better than maybe anybody in the world, can help us kind of understand what's going to happen on Saturday night.
You're right about that. Let's not keep them waiting any longer. Friend of the pod, football historian in general, but Texans know-it-all reporter, does it all, first of all, knows it all as well. John McClain, Sports Radio 610 senior columnist, will hop on the Blue Horseshoe pod to go behind enemy lines next. And welcome back in to the Blue Horseshoe podcast. As always, Ryan Hickey and George Bremer here with you. Time to go behind enemy lines, and we can now call him friend of the pod. John McClain does come back on, senior columnist for SportsRadio610.com. That is, of course, the Houston Texans flagship. John, welcome back.
Thank you very much, guys. I appreciate it. I hope everybody have a happy new year and is that happy holiday.
Listen, Colts line, absolutely a happy new year so far after a big Raiders win. And congratulations to you, John, making history. This is the latest we've ever had in the long and storied history of the Blue Horseshoe pod. Latest we've ever had someone come on and go behind enemy lines. So congratulations to you.
Well, I'm honored. It's amazing to me how far these two teams have come since the game last year in which Davis Mills threw the winning touchdown pass and 2-point conversion to Jordan Akins, and everybody in Houston was infuriated that they beat the Colts because it cost them the number 1 pick in Bryce Young, and they had to settle for C.J. Stroud.
I would never forget, John, celebrating on my couch with that, because that meant that there was a chance, at the time at least, that the Colts could trade up to the number 1 overall pick now that the Bears had it. So I was, at least in Colts land, fired up. I know, like you said, a lot of people down in Houston were very upset with that Hail Mary and then subsequent 2-point conversion to win that game. But like you said, we had Davis Mills, Sam Ehlinger this time last year. Now we go into week 18, a playoff game, Joe Buck, Troy Aikman on the call. Between, even if we go back just to week 2, John, week 2 when these teams met for the first time in 2023 to now, what is the biggest difference in the Texans from that early season game to where they are at this point in the season?
That game, after they opened the season with a loss at Baltimore and then they lose to the Colts, I thought, well, they're going to be terrible again. I had picked them to go 6-11. And of course, they won 3 games last year. And in that second game, the Colts pounded them. Richardson ran for 2 touchdowns before he got hurt again. And Minshew came off the bench, and Stroud threw 384 yards, 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. And that's the first time we saw, going back to the preseason, anything that resembled a quarterback who'd been taken second overall. And then, of course, he took off from there. Next week, they won by 20 at Jacksonville. Then they beat Pittsburgh by 24 here. And since those first 2 games, they've been 9-5, and they missed Stroud for 2 games and went 1-1. The big difference here to me is Jonathan Taylor is 5-0 against the Texans, and he has averaged 124 yards in his last 3 appearances. He's averaged 146, but the Texans' run defense was historically bad the last time he played against them. Now has gone from giving up 170 yards a game rushing to 88, and since those first 2 games, they're giving up 80, and they've been able to contain every running back. Haven't given up a 100-yard rusher, 90-yard rusher, but old JT has killed him when he's played. On the other hand, Gardner Minshew's 0-3 as a starter against the Texans, but they wouldn't have won that first game if it wasn't for him. So there's a lot of different starters on this team, specifically in the offensive line. Now, here's what Chris Strausser's had to deal with. The line he went to camp with early in training camp of their 5 starters, they have ended up, because of injuries, using 3 left tackles, 4 left guards, 4 centers, 1 right guard, and 4 right tackles. And it's been amazing. They've had to take guys off the street, and they've started, and he's done a really good job coaching in this system for the first time. He's never coached in that zone running scheme. And so the offensive coordinator, Bobby Slowick, talked Thursday about what a great job Strausser's done, considering all the changes he's had to deal with. Now we don't know if they'll have their left tackle, Laramie Tunsil. He's been playing with a bad knee after not practicing, but he had a growing pull. And you guys know how those injuries are. But for the Colts and the Texans, it's all hands on deck. Can't be looking ahead to the playoffs. If a guy can walk, he's got to be able to play because of the magnitude of this game.
Hey, you mentioned the offensive line. I know that first meeting there were 6 sacks. Obviously the huge numbers that Stroud put up, but he seemed like he was under fire all day. Has the protection improved with this carousel of people? Does it feel like the line is gelling together a little bit?
That's still the most sacks they've given up, and they go through stretches depending on who's in the line. And like Sunday, they played the Titans. They won 26-3. 1 sack was allowed, and it was Stroud's fault. He ran around. He should have gotten rid of the ball. Instead, he got sacked for a 12-yard loss. So he's contributed to some sacks. It was the same way with Deshaun Watson. If you guys remember, Watson used to like to hold the ball a lot to throw it down the field, and he gets sacked. And same thing with Stroud. The Texans are second in the NFL in explosive plays to the 49ers, which is amazing to me, considering they lost their most explosive receiver, rookie Tank Dell, weeks ago. Nico Collins is their best receiver, their leading receiver. But they got other guys like Robert Woods, Noah Brown. Those guys came off the scrap heap. Dalton Schultz has done a good job at tight end, not great, but Stroud likes to throw the ball. They lost at Carolina on the field goal with no time left, and they were awful. And Stroud said after the game, "Man, I'd like to have some explosive plays." So first-year coordinator Bobby Slowick, who came with Ryans from San Francisco, he's calling plays for the first time. We think those first-time play callers should be invincible. They make mistakes. They need to grow on the job as well. So ever since that point, they've had a lot of plays down the field. Now, the Titans came up playing a 2-deep zone, and Slowick didn't have Stroud throwing down the middle into coverage. He threw a lot of sideline routes. And I saw that stat that the Colts play zone 69% of the time, and Stroud's rating is 147 against zone coverage. So the way you get teams out of zones, of course, is to run the ball. And Texans have been very, very iffy running the ball. They're like 22nd rushing, but they still don't even average 100 yards a game. If they get 100, it's a big deal here. They're ready to pop the champagne corks because the pass protection has been much more consistent than the run blocking, no matter who's in the line.
The run game's interesting, John, because you're right. Overall, it's not been a very good rushing attack, but at least from my perspective, you tell me if I'm wrong. It feels like the running game has gotten better. Maybe the last month, the last 6 weeks, a little bit more consistent. You look at the numbers when they run for 100 yards as a team. The Texans this year are 6-1. Obviously, we know CJ Stroud is tremendous this season. Already's got Rookie of the Year sewed up. in this game going into week 18 here, how much do you think the Texans will try to establish run and get some sort of balance in this game? Or is it one of those games where, hey, CJ Stroud is great, the receivers are great, you know what? If we can't run the ball early, screw it. We're just going to ditch it and become a more one-dimensional offense.
Now, they wouldn't do that unless they fell behind early and had to throw. They'll still try to run even when they can't do it. One of the things that they do under Bobby Slowick, they run some reverses, end arounds, fake ends arounds, anything they can do to try to keep the defense off balance and give them just a few yards rushing. Dameon Pierce, who was on a pace for 1,200 yards as a rookie last year before he missed the last 4 with an ankle injury, he has not fit into this zone scheme. He is a straight ahead runner. He's not a guy that gets the ball, takes a step, cuts, and then finds the hole. Devin Singletary, who came from Buffalo, where he'd been the Bills' leading rusher for the last 3 years, he's adapted much better. He's had 3 100-yard games, but they, even if it's contained, which most teams do contain them, they'll still do it. They still need to play action because Stroud wants to throw the ball down the field, and I'm pretty sure the Colts will go all out trying to stop the run. I believe both these running games will be shut down, and I think that it'll come down to Stroud and Minshew.
Everybody talks about CJ Stroud with great reason because he is, like Ryan just said, the offensive rookie of the year. What about Will Anderson on the other side? And it seems like you may have the offensive and defensive rookies of the year this year.
I'm doing a column on that today for SportsRadio610.com, where all my stuff goes free, no paywall, which I hated at the Houston Chronicle, people complaining to me about the paywall. So I retired from the Chronicle so I could do commercials at my station. Newspapers don't let you do commercials. And so I don't, everything is free. And I'm working on a column about what a big game this is for players on both teams. I'm not sure about the Colts, but the Texans haven't even played a late game. They've all been at noon here. So this is a chance for them to showcase a lot of their players. Everybody will talk about Stroud. Will Anderson Jr. set a team record. Last week, he played 12 snaps because of an ankle injury. He had 2 sacks and 6 pressures. And he's number 2 to Jalen Carter in Defensive Rookie of the Year odds in Vegas. And so the column is about, I think the winning coach will finish second and Coach of the Year to Kevin Stefanski because of all the publicity the Browns have gotten with Flacco and 4 starting quarterbacks. And it'll be well-deserved. But the Browns have not come as far as the Colts and the Texans have. But it's just a bad year to be going up against Joe Flacco. And so I think Stefanski will win that. Nick Caserio, their general manager, has done an incredible job hiring Ryans in the draft, in free agency, and then during the season, they've made a lot of good moves because of injuries. But Anderson, he flies off the edge, and he's great against the run. I've got a bunch of stats from Pro Football Focus about him and Jalen Carter, and he plays the run better than Carter. And he has 7 sacks. That breaks the team record. He missed 2 games, I think. And but the Colts, I'll guarantee you, spent a lot of time on him. Their leading pass rusher, Jonathan Gennard, with 12.5, missed the last game. I'll be stunned if he plays in this game. He's in a contract year too, and he's been hurt every year. So he wants the big bucks, and being injured might hurt him. But they've got a guy, Derek Barnett, who was signed a month ago off the street, former number 1 pick of the Eagles, and he has been tremendous playing for a new deal. And so they'll have Barnett playing opposite Will Anderson Jr.
Injuries are a big one here for the Texans, John, going to this game. Like you just mentioned, Jonathan Gennard did not play. Will Anderson Jr. played 12 snaps in the last game. Noah Brown, Robert Woods, Sheldon Rankins, all so far in the first 2 days of practice for Houston, did not practice. You mentioned Larry Tunsil as well with a groin. What is the injury status right now going to Saturday? I know it's still early, recording this on Thursday morning, but do you expect any of those guys? I know you just said Jonathan Gennard, you don't expect to play. I guess maybe the better question is, who do you expect to play on Saturday with all these big-time performers right now not practicing this week?
I think Will Anderson Jr. will play on a limited snap count again. And Sheldon Rankins, who's been a huge surprise to me. Jets let him go. Texans signed him because DeMeco Ryans, he told Nick Casario he fits perfectly into what I want to do, and it has been a good fit. Where the Texans will be vulnerable, they lost Jimmy Ward, their team leader, captain, safety, 2 weeks ago for the season with a hamstring injury. And Jalen Petrie, who was their best rookie last year, he's not played well. So Flacco came out, went deep on the first play. Titans came out, went deep on the first series, and the guy should have caught it. So I'm guessing that Gardner Minshew at some point early is going to test them deep because the safeties have had problems in coverage. And one of the guys to watch, and this was a huge deal here, Derek Stingley Jr. missed the last 9 games of his rookie year with a hamstring injury, missed 8 games this year with a hamstring injury. But since he's been back, he has been outstanding. I mean, we see him closing on the ball, making fantastic knockaways or interceptions, and he has been everything they hoped he'd be when they drafted him 3rd overall, 1 spot ahead of Sauce Gardner. But I'm not sure. He stays on the same side. He doesn't roam with the best receiver yet. I think that may be more than next year. But the key for the Texans, their defensive front 7 has been great against the run. And it doesn't matter who they've played. Derrick Henry had averaged 203 yards and 7.1 a carry in his previous 5 games against the Texans. Now, John Taylor's pales in comparison to that. And he had 9 yards 2 weeks ago, and then he had 42 on Sunday because their run defense with a lot of the same players, just different coaches, different mindset has been tremendous. And watching Taylor and Moss, and they'll run them like crazy. Watching them against this run defense, even without Jonathan Grenard. I forgot Malik Collins, their left tackle, who's their best tackle. He missed the last game. Have no clue if he's playing, but it hasn't seemed to matter who they've played in their defensive line. The depth has stepped up with the starters.
Last one for me. I know when we talked to you at the beginning of the year, a lot of excitement down there for DeMeco Ryans. I can only imagine. Is he the mayor of Houston now? I mean, how much excitement is there after the season he's put together?
What was interesting is they fired David Culley and Lovie Smith. They were both one and dones. And around the country, people are like, what a terrible organization. Why would anybody want to coach there? Well, those people never watched the Texans play. And they were terrible, especially on offense last year. And so DeMeco wanted to come here. He wanted to come back where he was drafted, played 6 years, wives from here, got married here, kids born here. We're building their dream home here, started a home for wayward boys during the pandemic here. So he said it was his dream job. Every team that had an opening was interested. He didn't have time to interview with the Colts and the Panthers and the Cardinals. He did interview with the Broncos, but he told people, this is my dream job. I want to come home to Houston. And that got people fired up. But when the season started, people are like, okay, it's great that DeMeco's here, win 5 or 6 games this year, then maybe compete for a wild card berth in 2024. But the timetable has been increased for both of these teams. The Texans loved Shane Steichen when they interviewed him. They were very impressed. So the Colts got a really good coach as well. And with these quarterbacks in the division and the coaches in the division, it's going to be competitive for quite a while.
You're right about that. The AFC South is going to be no one's doormat anymore. That is for sure, John. On that note about DeMeco Ryans, who do you think has the coaching advantage in this game? Is it DeMeco or is it Shane?
Oh boy, if it was here, I'd say DeMeco. Since it's up there, I'm going to say Steichen. And I'm not sure what the Colts injury situation is. But one of the things the Texans have done is 9 of their last 11 games have been decided by 7 or fewer points. 8 of them decided by 5 or fewer points. They're 6-3 in those 9 games. And what's amazing is 9 of 11 have been decided in the last 30 seconds, 4 with no time left, 1 with 4 seconds left, 1 with 2 seconds left. So as DeMeco will say, we're battle tested. And one of the things I like, he's never even brought up injury. And we bring it up in the media and he won't talk about it. he said we don't talk about injuries because it's not an excuse. Everybody's got injuries. So I like his attitude. And it won't surprise me if the Colts win. It won't surprise me if the Texans win. The Texans are 4-4 in their last 8 games up there. They've won in 15, 16, 18, and 22. And so they've tended to play well there. They also got beat by, I think, Dan Orlovsky one year. So I think it's going to be a great game, great opportunity for the teams, the owners, the general managers, the coaches, and of course, the players.
Finally, John, the Texans win on Saturday if
CJ Stroud continues to play turnover-free ball. So important. He's only had 5 interceptions this year, 21 touchdown passes, and he missed 2 games. And it's not like DBs have dropped a lot of balls, but I think if Stroud can not commit any turnovers, Texans have their best chance to win.
check out his work, SportsRadio610.com. Tremendous senior analyst and just tremendous football historian, John McClain. Thanks so much for coming behind Enemy Lines. Enjoy the game on Saturday.
Guys, it's my pleasure. You guys enjoy the game too. It's going to be a big time opportunity for both teams in the AFC South that everybody thought was going to be terrible, but it's not.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, John.
My pleasure, guys. Thank you for having me.
We thank John for coming on again. Just and George, we could talk to him for 2 hours, honestly, and it still wouldn't be enough time to break it all down and just talk football. He knows. This guy knows his stuff. Knows his stuff for sure. Because there's so much to break down here. Let's start with one of the last things first, and that is when it comes to the head coaching matchup. I mean, it's funny. Both these coaches have basically done an identical job in terms of coming into a dysfunctional organization, turning it around. Obviously, DeMeco Ryans on the defensive end, Shane Steichen on the offensive end. You heard John say the Colts have the head coach advantage in part, or maybe mostly because they're at home on Saturday. Would you agree with John there that the Colts right now going to this game do have the slight head coach advantage?
I mean, I think it's a fair way of looking at it because I think these guys have been neck and neck all year. I mean, when you keep talking about like coach of the year and things like that, it's always, who do you choose between DeMeco Ryans and Shane Steichen because they're both right there. I think what's really interesting is you're talking about DeMeco being a defensive guy. That's where he really does his best work. It's where he came up. And then you're talking about Shane being an offensive guy. So they're literally going head to head in their strengths as well, which I think is just phenomenal. It's going to be a great game. I think the job DeMeco Ryans has done down there cannot be understated. You look at all the issues that they had the last 2 years with just really not looking much like an NFL team, honestly. I mean, for most of the last few years, they were just floundering, and he's able to come in here and like John said, with basically the same guys on defense, completely remake that unit. I mean, there's very little resemblance between this year's Houston Texans defense and anything they saw the last 2 years there. And I think the same thing's true for Shane Steichen and the Colts offense, especially from 2022 to 2023. No resemblance at all. And yes, the quarterbacks have changed, but a lot of the other pieces were here. Josh Downs is new. Pretty much everybody else was part of that offense last year that honestly, for large stretches of the season, just couldn't get anything accomplished at all. So I think both guys have come in, not just remade the franchises, but particularly their area, their side of the ball, they have made a tremendous difference in. And so, who's got the coaching edge? You might as well pick home field as the tiebreaker. It's neck and neck, and I think the exciting thing is going to be that way for years to come.
It is. And you said it before. I love that it's a showdown, right? It's not offensive mind versus offensive mind. It is offensive mind versus defensive mind, where that chess match is going to be playing itself out every single time the Colts have the ball. And I think because of the way the NFL rules work, and also just like I feel better as a Colts fan knowing I love the fact that Shane Steichen, being the offensive mind that he is, like I always will favor an offensive mind over a defensive mind when it is like one of those head-to-head showdowns, if you will. And so like you look at the Texans and they've, like I said, John mentioned it, he's 100% right. And we've seen it this year. That Texans team has done a total 180 defensively with how bad they've been for years especially in the run game. Now, how much more stouter they've been. The pass secondary is still a weakness for sure. Some injuries have obviously been a reason for that as well. But I feel more comfortable knowing Shane is going directly head-to-head against DeMeco Ryans when it's offense versus defense. And I love the fact, George, that the Colts are the one with the offensive guy. I think you see that advantage work out more in the offense's favor with rules and everything else that does work in their favor. I like the fact that right now in this matchup, the Colts have the offensive mind as head coach, and they have, with both guys doing tremendous, I'll take the guy in the offensive end.
That's fair too. I think the league is definitely weighted that way. But I think there's plenty of teams across this league that would be glad to have either one of these head coaches.
You are right. That you're 100% right about, without a doubt. Let me ask you this here. Let's go flip it on the other side here. Talk about the Colts defensively, because this Texans offense is fun to watch. You heard John, they are explosive, which does work in the Colts' favor in the fact that their number one priority is eliminating those explosive plays. I think one of the ways the Texans get explosive plays on Saturday is by establishing balance. You heard John say it before. This run game for Houston it's been up and down, but it has, at least from my perspective, watching them, I think it's gotten better and more consistent the last month or 6 weeks. Devin Singletary, really since coming on and taking the job from Dameon Pierce, has been consistent, has done a good job. And when the Texans have rushed for 100 yards as a team this season, it's happened 7 times, they're 6-1. So when they have balance, they win. Who do you think is, if you're Gus Bradley, George, who do you think is more important to stop on Saturday night? Is it Devin Singletary in the run game, or is it Nico Collins in the pass game?
I mean, if you look at what this team's done, last few weeks in particular, stopping the run's been so critical because you had 177 yards against Atlanta, and obviously see how that ends. It wasn't so much the run game as it was the screen game against Cincinnati, but that's kind of an extension of the run game, and they weren't able to get the job done there. But then on the flip side, you shut down Pittsburgh, you shut down Vegas, and you win those 2 games. So is it as simple as that? I don't know. But we'll say this. Nico Collins had 7 catches for 146 yards and a touchdown the last time these 2 teams met. You really don't want to have that repeated. But they did win that game by 11 points, even with Nico Collins catching the ball 7 times for 146 yards and a touchdown. So I think that sort of strengthens the run game being the more important element here as well.
I'm with you. I think even though Nico Collins has been the better player this year, I'm with you. The run game has to be the priority to stop for 2 reasons. Number one, I think we said before, like how this Texans offense becomes explosive is play action pass. And if you're the defense and you are biting on the play action fake because Singletary is churning up 5 yards of carry, you're in trouble. You are in big time trouble if there is balance on this offense. And that goes to the point number 2 is CJ Stroud, tremendous, right? This is not taking anything away from him. Nico Collins, like you just said, already lit up the Colts once this year, and he's been lining up a lot of opponents this season. He's been really good. But it is easier, I think, for the Colts to limit Nico Collins' explosiveness and that passing game's explosiveness when you know it's coming. When you can truly dedicate 7 guys to the pass game because the rushing attack you're not worried about. And you could just trust the front 4 that if they do hand the ball off, they're not going to get gashed. And so we saw last week with Devontae Adams. Impressive stat line. Had 13 catches, 162 and 2 touchdowns. Colts won the game. And Devontae never took over the game. Why? Because they contained him. There was no real threat of the run from the Raiders. So the Colts were, even though they're giving up yards, it was never 25 yards at a time. It always felt like it was 10 to 12. So you kept everything in front of you, and you are still able to win games, even with one guy going off. And the Colts have to look at that and say, we can live with Nico Collins basically putting up the same stat line in week 2. Like you just said, 7 for, 148? You can live with that if he does it again in week 18, as long as there's no complement of the run game. So even though, again, Collins is the better player, I'm with you. Stop Devin Singletary first, make that Texans offense one-dimensional. And even if Nico Collins has a big game himself, Colts have showed you last week, they could still win this game and still limit points on the board if it's only Nico Collins going off and not the running attack to balance it out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also it helps you with the pass rush. I mean, you stop the
True.
run, you get into second and long, third and long more often. And that's when you can really pin your ears back and get after the quarterback. So, yeah, I think there's a reason defense coordinators talk every week about everything starting with, the run game. And it's really played out that way the last 4 weeks for Indianapolis.
It has. I'm glad you brought up the pass rush too, because that's going to be a big key for two reasons. Number one, Dan Orlovsky's tremendous. Give him a shout out here for his analyst work on ESPN. I saw him with a clip this week in NFL Live. He mentioned this stat. CJ Stroud in the red zone holds the ball the third longest of any quarterback in the league. And he's holding it right to look in the end zone and make a play. And it's like 3.5, I think, seconds he holds the ball to on average, when the league average in the red zone is 2.75. So almost a full second longer. If you're the Colts and CJ Stroud's holding the ball that long, you could look at it as, well, he's trying for the end zone, he's making plays. That's a positive. I look at that as a positive for the Colts. Of if he's going to hold the ball for 3.5, 4 seconds, that pass rush is getting home. With how good the Colts have been getting after the quarterback this year, 4 guys with at least 7 sacks. No other NFL team has done that. And I think it's in the last decade, only 2 other NFL teams have done that, having 4 guys with at least 7 sacks. So the Colts have been very balanced on that defensive line in terms of getting after the quarterback. If Stroud's going to hold the ball in the red zone, we saw last week the Titans did a really good job of limiting Houston in the red zone, only allowing 1 touchdown, even though they gave up 26 points. I think that's going to be a huge win for the Colts. If, again, we see Stroud continue to hold the ball longer, I think that favors the Colts in this matchup.
And that goes all over the field. I mean, the red zone is where it's highlighted, but his time to pass is one of the longer in the league. So you figure he's going to hold on to the ball. He's going to try to make plays similar to when Deshaun Watson was here. I mean, it's one of the things that John was talking about. You want to make sure that you can make them pay for that. You got a quarterback who's going to stand back there and run that risk. It works both ways, right? Because if his receiver works himself open and he gets the ball deep, it's a big time play for the offense. And I think especially with the inexperience in the Colts secondary, it's going to be tempting for Houston to do that on Saturday night, and for Stroud to try to hold the ball an extra second or two and see if he can, get a little more separation and get that ball out to Nico Collins or, whoever's running deep for him. But I think it's become paramount now for the Colts to make them pay. When they hold on to that ball for that second or two longer, you've got to get home. You've got to get sacks. I think that might be the most critical element of this game for what we just drew up. That risk reward is huge. And if the Texans win that battle more often with explosive plays, they'll walk out of here with a victory. If the Colts win that battle more often with sacks, you would imagine Indianapolis would walk out here with victories. Look at the first meeting, 384 yards, one of Stroud's best games against anybody all year, but they only put up 20 points. Most of that yardage came in the second half. He got sacked 6 times. That was a huge factor in the game. And I think, I don't know, look across the league this year, teams' records when their quarterbacks get sacked 6 times cannot be very positive.
No, I would agree with you there. And it also highlights, again, the need to eliminate the run, because if you can, again, eliminate the run, drop 7 guys back, you can keep those safeties deep. And when Stroud is looking deep, not have him find anyone streaking open, because you can put resources to make sure there's no top being taken off the defense, force him to hold the ball longer, which again should allow that Colts pass rush to get home like it did in week number 2. And the other reason George pass rush is going to be so important is because it's a revenge game. John said it. Basically, his name is Voldemort. Chris Strausser, who has, to his credit, has done a very good job with the Texans O-line this year, all things considered. I mean, I should have done the math. John was listing off the number of players that have used at every single position. What was it, like 15 guys? It felt like that they have
like
used.
A practice squad.
Unbelievable. I mean, 5 left tackles, 4 right guards. I mean, 3 centers. It's like 15 guys that have taken snaps and have tried to protect CJ Stroud in some form. And Strausser does deserve credit. But with that said, George, rightfully was run out of town this time last year. Coming back to Indy for the first time, it would be very fitting to have that offensive line for Houston look like it looked last year for the Colts. Or maybe Kwity Paye, George, can do the Kayvon Thibodeau and maybe do a snow angel next to CJ Stroud if he gets a sack on Saturday. That would be fitting.
I'll tell you, it's going to be, yeah, that's kind of one of those underrated parts of this game, because I'm sure Chris Strauss would like nothing more than to walk out of here with a victory and go to the playoffs and leave his former team waiting until next year. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Colts, I'm sure, would love nothing more than to attack their former coach's unit and have that be a big part of the reason why they're moving on and continuing what has been a remarkable 2023 season for both teams. I will say, honestly, it's a little bit sad that they can't both get in, that there's no scenario where both of them get in, because their seasons have been so parallel to one another. Even like statistically, they're really close together. It's a little bit of a shame that they both can't advance, because I think both teams deserve to have that ending to their story.
You're right. It really has been a fun season for both sides, and someone's going to walk out a loser, and it better not be the Colts. That's for sure. If it's not going to be the Colts, George, overall, what units need to play better, you think, in order for the Colts to get a win? Is it the offense or the defense?
That's a really good question. I mean, I look back at the first meeting, and again, these teams are completely different than they were in week 2. There's almost as much difference between them from week 2 to now as there's from last year to now. I mean, it's completely different units. There's a lot of different personnel on both teams in the game that were not in there. Colts secondary obviously looks completely different than it did, for better and worse, in the first meeting. I know the Texans offensive line is completely made over from that first time around, for better and worse. So, it's hard to draw a ton of conclusions from that game and carrying them over. But it does stick in my head how fast that team started, how fast Indy started. I think that affected that game a lot. They're up 14-7 in the blink of an eye, and they put up 31 points total, 28 in the first half. Talking about that fast start, so I feel like the offense has got to get going. Anytime you play a prolific quarterback like C.J. Stroud is, your offense has got to score points. You always talk about defense has got to play well. Yeah, they do. But those guys get the reputation that they get. C.J. Stroud's going to be the offensive rookie of the year for a reason. They get these reputations because they consistently put points up too. So I think, yes, the defense has to play well. But I think anytime you're going up against a quarterback who provides the kind of threat Stroud does, your offense has to play well too. And you've got to go in there with a mindset of probably at least 28 points to win this game.
It's got to be the offense. You're right. Number one, you're not winning a game 13-10. Like if you're scoring 13 points, you're losing this game. So number one is, yes, you have to score points. I think offensively, you have to play a lot better than you. Like, I think you can survive a bad defensive game more than you could survive a bad offensive game on Saturday night. And also, too, this team, you mentioned before, 28-10 at halftime back in week 2, the Colts were ahead. This team is built to get out early and salt games away. I know it's not been pretty, and I know they've gotten out to fast starts and have seen it evaporate, but they are more built to play with a lead than they are to play from behind. And obviously, if you can play with a lead, you hope, and we'll talk about this here in a second, you hope they can run the ball, salt away the clock, and limit possessions for the Texans offense, but also for the Colts defense. If you can get out to a lead, and all of a sudden now when the Colts go on the field defensively, they can pin their ears back and force, just by the score, the Texans to be one-dimensional and pass it. Again, I think that, to me, plays into their hands and makes the job a lot easier. So I think when you add it up, they need the offense. If you're going to say, hey, one unit is going to play well here, it has to be the offense, because I don't think they can survive a bad offensive game and still win this game. They can survive a bad defensive game and win this game. I don't think they could survive a bad offensive game. And like you said, they're not winning this game 13-10. They could win 28-25. They can't win 13-10. That is for sure. Speaking of the run game, John highlighted it. He's 100% true. Defensively, the biggest reason for this turnaround has been the rush defense. It's been tremendous. Like he said, T.Y. Hilton owned the Colts, owned the Texans. And then when T.Y. gave up the crown, he gave it right to Jonathan Taylor, because JT stepped in and has picked up where T.Y. left off, just in a different way, just running the ball down the Texans' throat when he's been healthy and on the field. Did not play in week number 2, which hopefully does bode well for this offense going into this matchup in week 18. But this Texans defense is now one of the best rushing defenses in the league. It's going to be tough sledding here for the Colts to get a run game established, which goes back to one of the initial points you talked about. Ryan Kelly's health here is going to be big because this, to bring it full circle, George, I think this game is going to be won on the offensive line or lost on the offensive line, in part because they have to be able to establish some sort of balance. It's going to be tough. It's not going to be anywhere near as easy as it mostly has been facing this Texans team the last few years.
When you look at Braden Smith and the effort that he put out there last week, playing through his injuries, leaning on a wall in the locker room after the game, and you could just tell how much it's taken out of him. He's huge. When he's out there, they run the ball better. I mean, the numbers are pretty clear there. Jonathan Taylor looked a little more like Jonathan Taylor on Sunday. They're going to need that kind of performance from him. And I think you just go back again. I mean, I hate to keep going back to Cincinnati and Atlanta games, but you look at the things that went wrong in those games, and not being able to run the ball is really high on the list. I mean, the two things they did not do was get after the opposing quarterback in either of those games, and they did not run the ball effectively. And when they don't run the ball effectively, you see the offense bogged down. I mean, my dog is upset. He's saying, you got to run the ball. You see the offense bogged down quickly. And you see them have a lot of trouble just even getting first downs, let alone putting points on the board. So I think they've got to find a way to open up those lanes, and it's not going to be easy. Like you said, it is definitely not going to be easy against this particular defense that Houston's putting out there. But Jonathan Taylor has done it before against good run defenses. The Colts this year have run the ball well against good run defenses at times. This is absolutely Saturday night's got to be one of those days.
Absolutely. I mean, the last 3 home games, the Colts have all rushed for over 100 yards. Coincidence or not, George? I don't think so. They're 3-0. In the last 3 home games, they've all run for 100 yards each. So this is a team that, again, does need balance. We've seen Gardner Minshew, right? When that play action, that RPO game is working on the defense and they're biting, all of a sudden now this guy's looking like Peyton Manning out there, slinging it all across the yard and having some big plays. The Colts' offensive explosives are built coming off the run game and having that balance, which is going to be huge here for this team in this game. We'll give you a prediction in a second, but George, look, this is obvious, but it has to happen. I've not seen it official yet, so hopefully between now and Saturday it's official. Maybe it's a secret, which I think could work even better. You have to have T.Y. Hilton banging the anvil before the game. There's not even a second option, George. It has to happen.
Yeah, I don't know how the anvil rotation is put in place, but you would imagine T.Y. in the building would be a good thing with the Texans coming to visit. I don't know. I think it's more important that Jonathan Taylor continue to take that crown from him, that he solidifies himself at the end of this game as the new Texan killer in town because the Colts are going to need it. They're absolutely going to need it.
If T.Y. can't, for whatever reason, scheduling conflict, busy guy, maybe have JT do it. Have the first player in the game bang the anvil.
It'll be huge. I think you're going to have that primetime show. I would imagine Lucas Oil is going to be as loud as it has been at any point this year. It's going to be it's a playoff game. I mean, we've said that a few times late in the season because it's had that kind of feel. But this one, the stakes are postseason stakes. You either play next week or you don't, based on whether or not you win this game.
You're 100%. This is literally a playoff game. The Steelers game we talked about, if you lose, you're probably eliminated from the playoffs. And we're seeing that right now with the Steelers needing help to get in after they lost that game. But there's no doubt about it. There's no scenario, like you just mentioned, the Colts playing next week if they lose. It's in every sense of the word, literal, figurative playoff game. And so the good news, too, is Texans fans do not travel the way Steelers fans do. So even though the Steelers fans had a good showing that Saturday game a few weeks ago, Colts, I thought it was tremendous atmosphere. It was very loud. It's going to have to be that way again, even louder now, even more intense on Saturday night. I know Jim has not given the official word yet. I'm going to go ahead and assume the roof and the window are going to be closed. So it's going to be a loud, raucous atmosphere, which should help a young Colts team feed off that energy. It worked against the Steelers where they came out, fed off the crowd energy after a slow first quarter to help take them over the finish line there. It's going to be wild. take off the restrictor plate, George. There is no reason not to go crazy, not to be loud, not to sell out. The playoffs have come early. It is here. Saturday night, Lucas Oil Stadium. Let's go. Let's go. Last playoff
Absolutely.
win. We know who's against.
Cincinnati Bengals. Last playoff win was the Bengals. That one was
Well, last playoff win at home. You remember the last
Yes.
playoff win overall?
Last playoff win overall was the Houston Texans.
Houston Texans.
In Houston.
In H-Town, which if T.Y. Hilton maybe can't bang the anvil, maybe we'll get the last quarterback to win a playoff game to bang the anvil.
The clown mask game.
That's right.
Was the last time. That feels like forever ago. It's just, I guess, 3 years ago now, but it really felt like it was. Well, no, that one is 5 years ago. 3 years ago, they played the Bills over in a game they should have won. I mean, we can get into that on another pod, but they should have won that one. But yeah, the ghost mask game, the clown mask game with the ghost. You know what else happened that day though that people don't really talk a lot about? Huge rushing game for Marlon Mack. He was I think he set a franchise record for postseason rushing yardage in that game. So it was a massive day for him. And the Colts need to replicate that energy on Saturday night.
Let's see, just to bring it up really fast. Here we go. 21-7 to get the exact number, 148. 24 for 148, 6.2 yards per carry for Marlon Mack. Hot take here, George. If JT can average 6.2 yards per carry on Saturday night, I'm going to lock up a win here for the Colts. All right, lock it up right now. Take it to the bank.
Unless it's on like 3 carries, I'm with you.
Yeah, you're right. 3 carries for 18 yards. We're in trouble. That's a fair point. That's a fair point. Context is definitely needed here. All right. We've previewed the game. We've welcomed John on. We've heard John's perspective on the Houston angle going to this game. Injuries are going to be a big one here. I mean, the best pass rusher maybe could not play. The second best pass rusher, Will Anderson Jr., is going to be limited. The injury outlook right now definitely does favor the Colts. Vegas, though, with that in mind, still has Houston right now a 1-point road favorite. Now, because unfortunately I was run down, had the flu last week, we're not able to give official game picks. If you want to do the honor system, George, and you want to say you were going to pick the Colts to win, I'll respect it. I'll update the records. If not, if you want to just call last week a pass, right now, tough L 2 weeks ago against the Falcons, 9-6. Right now is your record as we sit here. Very impressive.
Yep. I'm not as good as Max Bowen though. That's the one we're all looking for out there on Twitter. Kevin Bowen's son. I think he's won 8 in a row. So everyone will be anxiously anticipating what his pick is for this game. Maybe we get him on next year to make picks and, be a little more accurate with our prognostication.
You're right about that. He has been on fire, and it goes to show you, man. Maybe we're doing it wrong. Maybe we should not use logic and instead just have a bag, 2 helmets in, and just blindly pick out. And I'm sure that if we just did that, our picks would be impeccable.
I mean, it's possible. You never know. We got to come up with some system because, I'll take 9-6, but you really want to be 15-0, right? I mean, you want these. You don't want and I don't have an 8-game winning streak. I know that. Only Max can have that kind of power. But knowing that I do not have the powers of prediction of Max Bowen, I will try my best. I think it's going to be a tight game. I think everybody kind of agrees with that. And the most surprising thing will be if one of these teams wins in a lopsided fashion. I imagine the Colts are going to try to shorten the game, limit possessions. I mean, you would think that that's going to be the game plan. Keep C.J. Stroud off the field, long drives, all those sorts of things. They've run the ball well at home lately. I'm going to, predict that happens again, even against a really good Houston front. And I think they're going to get after C.J. Stroud again. I think they're going to get a few sacks. So I will say Indianapolis 23, Houston 20, in what'll be probably a game long remembered in these parts. Either way.
Yes. Oh, either way, you're right. This game will be talked about for a while. In this game, I think the Colts red zone defense here is the red zone itself is going to be, I think, a big key here. I think the Colts will play well in the red zone. I think the Colts defense will do a very good job at keeping Houston out of the red zone. I do think the Texans are going to move the ball between the 20s. They had a lot of success doing that last week. But again, the score, this is a bad example per se because the Titans got blown out, but the Titans did do a very good job of keeping Houston out and having them settle for field goals. I think that's what's going to happen here on Saturday night. I think the Colts defense is going to be bend, but don't break. Force 3, not 7 from Houston. That to me is going to be the difference. I think this is going to be a little bit of a higher scoring game than maybe we're used to seeing from this Colts offense. I'm going to say 27-23. And the Colts make enough plays. They have been a team to where when they need to have it, especially at home, they have played well, and they have played well offensively. So I think that trend does continue. 27-23, Colts punch in the red zone opportunities. They get stops defensively in the red zone, and we are preparing, George, this time next week for a playoff game against a team TBD. Let's go.
It'll be an interesting Sunday if the Colts win Saturday night. I know that because you'll
Oh.
have a lot of rooting interest from the Colts perspective on Sunday if they win the game on Saturday night.
Speaking of which, let's get right now a daily double. We've given you our game picks. Both have the Colts winning. George, put you on the spot here. Do the Colts make the playoffs as a wild card, or are we going to be back in Lucas Oil Stadium next weekend for a home playoff game?
I'm gonna go with wild card. I think Will Levis is injured, as from what I've heard. He hasn't been practicing this week. Tennessee did not look like a team that wants to play spoiler last week. I think Jacksonville will pull that out and win the division.
Unfortunately, I agree. Look, it's the Panthers, right? But with that said, I was impressed with the backup quarterback, how Jacksonville played. Never really let the Panthers in it. And this is a Panthers team that scored 30 points the week before against the Packers. So they're the worst team in the league, but they have been at least scrappier and more competitive in the last few weeks. Credit to Jacksonville for not making this a game with the backup quarterback. I think Trevor Lawrence, if I had to sit it right now and guess, I'm going to assume he plays. But like you said,
Yeah.
I think right now Tennessee just mailed it in. They're going to try to play spoiler. I don't think it's going to work too well. I do think the Colts, when it's all said and done, will be playing a road playoff game next week, and the Jaguars will barely hold on to that division and win it yet again. George, oh my goodness. Saturday night cannot come fast enough. It's going to be a tremendous atmosphere. If you're watching the game at home, you're going to have the voices of Joe Buck and Troy Aikman on the call. That's when you know it's big time right now. By the way, not forced on the call because, this is a game scheduled in July and now the team sucks and it's December like we may have saw last year. ESPN and Joe and Troy, if you will, we'll just say, chose this game, George. That's when you know the tide has truly turned from last year to this year.
And Colts and Texans have come a long way from Sam Ehlinger and Davis Mills to Joe Buck and Troy Aikman.
Oh, I was looking at the box score really fast. Do you know the leading receiver last year in that game for the Colts? Do you have any idea who it was?
No clue.
Deion Jackson.
It fits. It fits in that contest. So the less said about last year's game, the better.
Yeah.
It was an interesting outcome for both teams. Hey, the way that game ended, the Texans end up with C.J. Stroud and Will Anderson. The Colts end up with Anthony Richardson. I think you're going to see a lot of all of those guys in the future. And as we talked about with John, a division that's going to be highly competitive, and I think for the foreseeable future.
I think you're right. I think this is the beginning of what is going to be playoff-like games between the Colts and the Texans now for the next 5 years. This feels like definitely just the beginning. That's for sure. So hopefully the Colts get off to a good start in that budding rivalry that we have right here. And they do make the playoffs, defend home field, and keep their season alive for at least one more week. Appreciate you joining us right here on the preview pod, Colts Texans. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, Blue Horseshoe Pod, and also wherever you get your pods, same name. Check us out because we got what is going to be hopefully a joyous post-game pod Not a funeral. That's what we're going for. No funeral. I'm not wearing black, George. The tux is put away. Well, not tux, I guess suit, I should say. I'm not wearing no. I'm not at least going to be a psycho and wear a tux to a funeral. That's for sure. But the black suit has been put away. Not breaking it out this weekend. That's for sure. Colts are going to win. We'll break it all down after the game right here in the Blue Horseshoe Pod. Enjoy it. And hopefully we're talking about a playoff team in the Indianapolis Colts. We'll talk to you after the game. It's been the Blue Horseshoe Pod